Thank you for joining us for the Logic of English Master Teacher Training. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a story. I was speaking at a professional conference when a man who was at retirement age came up to my table and bought a copy of Uncovering. And then he went away for the evening, and then the next morning he came back, and this gentleman was crying. And he said, "Denise, could I tell you my story?" And I was like, "Well, sure." And he said, "I took this book, Uncovering the Logic of English, back to my hotel room and I started reading." And he said, "And I realized something. My whole life I have struggled with reading and spelling, but I've never told anybody." And he went on to say, "I have a degree in engineering." Okay, so just pause and think. So this man, whose name is Jack, was successful. He had a degree in engineering, and then he was even the mayor of his town. But he's crying, and he said, "I've secretly struggled my whole life with reading and with spelling." And he said, "As I read this book, I had an aha moment." He said, "My whole life, I have thought that reading was about words. So I've spent my whole life trying to memorize words. And as I read, I realized that there's a code, and it's about sounds." And he said, "When I was in elementary school, my teachers told me that some of the letters made sounds, but he said there were so many exceptions, and they were teaching me sight words at the same time, that I unconsciously decided that reading was about words." And he said, "Now I get it. I get the code. It makes sense to me." And he said this as well. He said, "Every year since I've retired, I have tutored a third grade student." And he said, "They're always boys." And he said, "They all struggle in reading." And he also said this. He said, "I had an aha moment as well as I was reading that every single one of these boys is a gearhead like me. They need to understand why. And when they don't understand why, it doesn't make any sense to them, and so therefore they struggle with reading." So he went on to say, "I think you mistitled your book from Uncovering the Logic of English. It should be called The Heartbreak of English, A Logical Means to Recovery." So I tell these stories because I think it's really important. As teachers, many of us just learn to read with the amount of phonics or the tools that we were taught, not understanding that 2/3 of students struggle with reading or more, and many even more struggle with spelling. And that I tell these stories of people who struggle because they're able to explain to us what they need to succeed and the impact this makes on their lives. As we wrap up, again, I just encourage you to go back to those first units of the training where you made posters. Review your original definitions of what it means to read and what are the skills that you needed to teach reading. Go back and think about how your understanding of reading has changed. And I want to say to you, sometimes what I experience when I do these trainings is that teachers begin to feel really badly. They begin to think about all the students in the past that they could have helped if they knew this information sooner. But it's really important to understand that we cannot teach what we do not know. And so there's no shame in that. We can't give to others what we don't have. But you now have new tools to bring to your classrooms. If you are in a classroom that is not implementing Logic of English for curriculum, there are many tools you can bring right now to your classrooms from the training materials that you have received and that you've been using. You can teach your students the basic phonograms. You can teach them the spelling rules using the flashcards. You can introduce one phonogram or spelling rule a week. Dr. Jones has even told me that she had a high school honors class where she introduced these concepts in a high school honors English class, and those students loved it because it answered their questions about how words were read and spelled. So these tools are helpful not only to kids who are struggling with reading, but to the top students in reading and in English, because again, they answer questions that we all have about the language. Another tool that you have that's really excellent is sounding out the sight words. If you're in an elementary school classroom and you're required to teach sight words, go ahead and look those sight words up and then teach the phonograms and the spelling rules needed to explain those words, and then the kids can decode those words as well as thousands and thousands of other words. Finally, you can look up the rules, the phonograms in Uncovering the Logic of English. You can find explanations there, and many of the words that you might have questions about are at the end of those rules in those chapters too. Excellent resources for bringing change immediately to your classroom. Another tool that you can use is to teach spelling analysis. When you're introducing new vocabulary or new spelling words, use the spelling analysis process in your classrooms. It will help kids understand the logic underlying the words. If you are implementing Logic of English, you've now been introduced to Foundations and Essentials, and we hope that you feel a lot more confident bringing these materials directly to your students. One way that you can join us is by sharing with others what you've learned. You can share with other teachers the phonograms, the spelling rules, the concepts that you went, wow, that really made a difference for me. Share it with parents. Share it on social media. And I know this might sound really nerdy, but share your favorite spelling rule. Share your favorite phonogram. Because I believe that reading education will only change when everyone knows how and why words are read and spelled the way they are. This isn't about experts. This is about changing culture. So go and share this information with others and help us to make a difference in changing the literacy statistics. If you have any lingering questions after you've completed the Master Teacher Training, please share them with us on the discussion tab. You can also share them with us through our social media channels, and we would be happy to answer them for you. We also invite you to give us feedback to improve this training. We are serious about changing how reading is taught, and we want to make these trainings as useful and as beneficial to teachers as possible. So please give us your feedback. And once again, thank you so much for joining us in the Logic of English Master Teacher Training.